Hi, shalom friends. Have you gone shopping recently in a large store and go to the section where they sell water? Now, I'm not that old, but I remember when I went to that section, there was only usually one or two choices. There was water, there was filtered water, and then the pure water came from some type of a mountain or perhaps a geyser. But it's almost humorous. You could actually spend many minutes trying to figure out what type of a pure water do you want. Do you want the filtered? Do you want it with the electrolytes? Do you want it with the vitamins? And there's water that comes from the sky or heaven, and there's waters that come from the depths, and there's waters that have been coming from somewhere in between but filtered X amount of time. I mean, it's funny in a way. Water is H2O. I mean, why so many choices? Or to put it a little bit differently, how pure can water actually be? And it seems that in our obsession for perfection, we're looking for a purity of water which we would not associate with ordinary, filtered, healthy water. Well, that got me thinking, and I came to the conclusion that actually none of those waters is as pure as the water that God has implanted within us. And that water I'm referring to is a tear, T-E-A-R. Of course, you can look it up scientifically. What is a human tear? What's inside of a human tear in terms of chemistry? But I'm thinking the larger issue. I don't think there's anything as pure, as sincere, as honest, and as true as a tear. But what makes us tear? Why do we cry? Well, to a certain extent, many people associate crying with a type of a sadness, a calamity. But upon reflection, we realize that we cry for other reasons. We often cry because we're very happy. And then we say to ourselves, well, why am I crying if I'm so happy? But let me throw in some other times when we cry. Some people, their eyes well up with tears when they hear beautiful music. Others, when they see a sight that's touching. You just see something beautiful, whether it be in the laws of nature, whether it be a scenic sight or a human sight. To see a person helping someone else in a very, very honest way can sometimes bring you to tears. So what brings tears? Well, there are many reasons for it, but Chassidus, which is the inner Torah, essentially it reveals the secrets or the mysteries or the depth that's found in Torah, also reveals quite a bit about the human personality. And I'll share with you one reason that Chassidus gives. Chassidus explains that any experience that cannot be explained logically causes a reaction which is beyond the mind. And that reaction is expressed in tears. If you could explain what you're seeing and why it's meaningful to you, chances are you won't come to a tear. But if you get, so to speak, choked up, you can't speak it, and in a certain way you can't even understand it. You don't know why yourself, but there's something poignant about this scene. There's something very moving about this, and you don't even know why. That feeling, that acknowledgement, or that intuition will express itself as tears. And there's an expression it's beyond meisrei meichen. It's the excess or beyond the capacity to reason and logic. So if we're confronted with some type of a scene, or we are involved in an experience which is not only happy, it's deliriously happy, or we're involved in an experience which does not only make us sad, but it's a profound loss to us, we can't explain it. We cry. Actually, the greatest form of empathy is a tear. As it is well known, story after story after story where great people have gone into a situation where they're confronted with someone who's in deep experiencing grief, and all they did was they shed some tears. And later on, that person said, "Rabbi or Sir or Mrs. or whatever, you made me feel better." Not because you said something, there was nothing to say, but because for a moment you were experiencing what I was experiencing, something profound that cannot be explained. So think about it, friends. Have you shed any tears recently? Well, I'm, with God's good, gracious kindness to me, He's made me a father and a grandfather, and I am sure even now I could remember tears that you shed when you raise children. Sometimes they're apparent, and sometimes they're very close to being apparent. What does that mean? Well, they tell a story of a village that was close to a border. I don't know which countries we're referring to. And in order to go from one country to the other, of course, you needed a visa or a passport. And if you wanted to transport some type of silk, you had to pay a tax. Well, in this village, there was a Jewish cemetery which was over the border. So the Jewish Burial Society had an agreement with the border guards that if they would be out carrying a corpse to be buried in the neighboring village, which had a Jewish cemetery, they would not be accosted, they would not be told to show your passports, and so on. Well, this was a workable situation from both sides. However, some unscrupulous people figured out a way to actually steal from the government. What did they do? Every couple of weeks, they would smuggle some very expensive silk, but they would put it into a coffin, and they would get dressed up like the pallbearers, and they would walk over the border and bury the so-called corpse. Of course, later on that night, they would open it up, take out the merchandise, and they stole a sizable amount of money. Well, this goes one to a third time, and one of the border guards doesn't like what he sees. Something doesn't seem right. So as soon as they come to the border, he says, "Stop, where are your passports?" And they become very indignant. "Well, we're pallbearers, we have this agreement, this is disrespectful to the corpse, you can't do this to us, every moment it's a mitzvah to bury." And the more they protest, the less convinced he is. So he says, "Let's leave this corpse over here, and I'm taking you into the room where my commanding officer is." And of course, as much as they protested, they had no choice. And under an armed escort, they go into this room. When they go into this room, the fellow says, "I sent out a soldier to open it. They found contraband. What do you say?" They began to cry. He looked at them without any pity. And he said, "You know, if you would have cried before, you wouldn't be crying now." And that's where the story ends. You see, a pallbearer, if he considers it to be something of levity, he didn't cry when he was supposed to cry. In this particular case, he cried against his will. Let's put it in slightly different terms. They say about some very holy people, when they were asked, "What made you so holy? What propelled you to holiness?" The answer was that when my mother lit the candles, she cried. She prayed for me. Her tears, which were pure, helped guide the destiny of her child. Well, what happens if a person is too busy to take care of their children? Well, there's society, there's schooling. Occasionally, what happens is they cry later because they find their child in an emergency room, or they find their child hanging out with people which are not good people, or heaven forbid, in a prison, and then they cry. And then one could make that remark. If they would have cried when they should have cried, they wouldn't be crying now. Now, I only tell this story. I hope you never have to cry about your children or your loved ones or your students. But it's something to think about. The purest form of water is a tear because it comes from a pure heart. And if you share a tear, not for you necessarily, but for someone else, that tear becomes even more pure. So, my friends, could you imagine how many tears have been shed by the Jewish people because of godliness that has been obscured, or because the Holy Temple has been destroyed, and most of all, because there's still something in the world which is not right? Let's hope and pray that we don't have to shed any more tears. May the Mashiach come, and then the tears that will appear upon the cheeks of all mankind will be tears of happiness. Shalom.